so tired. And yet, this is one of these things where you're not allowed to get tired. You have to, when you get tired, you have to pass it on to the next generation. So what's going on today is that for more, some people like to say, well, every student is their own individual reason, but I think there are some serious reasons about why we are seeing a decline in applications to higher ed of 2 or 3% every year, headed towards 2026, which I talk about a lot. 2026 has not been postponed. And it is a consequence that in 2008, during the Great Recession, we stopped having babies. And unlike other recessions, when the Great Recession was over, it didn't bounce back. So come 2026, we have this ongoing decline. And then in 2026, we have, depending on what you want to call it, it's a big cliff, where the number of eligible people to go to school drops, depending on where you are in the country, 5, 10, 15, and in some pockets, 20%. So we have then these two things that are creating the crisis. One is whatever's going on that is discouraging people from higher ed, and the other is the whole demographics. And so we can't change the demographics. That happened, many years ago, and unless you can miraculously create babies. But what we can do is have an influence on this erosion. And that there are probably two big things going on. One is the whole discussion about student debt and how big it is and how people have gotten so much debt. They have jobs, they can't pay them back, that whole story. And then the other part is something that we have little influence, but higher ed is beginning to take seriously, is that have they become irrelevant? And so what is going on in higher ed that people are saying, why even if I don't go in debt, why would I spend this money when I have a remarkably good job, blah, 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 blah. And so these two things. So our job isn't done, right? Our job is that we provide resources. But the other part of our job is to champion the importance of what higher ed does for women. By the way, we don't start out on an even plane. Well, maybe on entry level, we start out on an even plane. But without the degree, you have no possibilities. So we have this double role. One is to keep providing the resources, but the other is to keep championing why it is that women need the credentials, because credentials get you to the table. You can't get to the table if you don't have credentials. And we need to just not get to them. So I got wonderful support. I spent it almost all of it on childcare. Today I have a scholarship or a fellowship at the University of Minnesota where I got my PhD. And I was having lunch with the current batch of recipients. And this woman said, I used it all for childcare. Oh, it's 40 years later, and they still need to have money for childcare. And I will tell you that the requirements, or more appropriately, the lack of requirements of how I spent that money have informed how I set up this fellowship at Minnesota, right? You have to be enrolled, you have to be a student, you can do those minimum things, but you can spend it any way you need. Okay, so I don't know if you want to ask me anything. I was asked to make a few comments about the importance. I hope that I've said, okay, we can't get tired, our job isn't done. Yeah, go ahead.
Nancy. As a retired school counselor, I can totally understand why today many women are not looking at having children. There are too many obstacles, and the states and the government are not providing for women what they need. And not only is the economy against them, but also we need to consider the fact that we really, really need to look about why we need immigration. We need immigration to replace all of those people who have died from COVID and to take their jobs and to start building our country again. And we cannot rely on women having 8 and 10 and 15 kids.
You know, it's very funny that you say that. My, please don't be insulted, but so my most amazing high school English teacher was about 5 foot tall. And he came, he came from this wonderfully Catholic family. And he was the 13th and last. Okay, right? And he was, well, I think I was my first teacher I was in love with. And anyway, the whole thing is that by the time they got to him, they now used all the resources on him. So all the older ones did all the things that in central Pennsylvania, people who didn't go to college, but he went to college and he was so fabulous, right? But that's right. I grew up in a farming community. 6, 7, 8 kids was not unusual. And today we are below replacement. I think we're below replacement.
We are.
But this is what we have, right? It's important that we take what we have. You know, it's kind of like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Well, all our eggs are in this basket. And so we have to take very good care of that basket. Thank you. Anyone else have comments or thoughts?
Well, I think that's terrific. Lorraine.
I was just going to mention that this is a global, almost global problem. We have now the baby boomers all retiring, and in China, India, America, Canada, Japan, Europe, everywhere around the world, instead of having the overpopulation we talked about when I was a teenager, we're now facing a demographic crisis of underpopulation. And so I think that means that countries have to rethink how they're going to approach their nations and their resources and get the most out of them. And I agree with Nancy about the, the fact that the USA, we've stopped so much of our immigration is a real tragedy, because that's what's provided the resources for us to become a great country.
But let me add a moment, and this is the, the great line is there's no free lunch. You do and you're damned if you don't. So one of the problems with our global warming is that we have a lot of people. In fact, there are people who estimate that the planet was designed to support 6 to 7 people, not 8 to 9. So it's very interesting give and take and yin and yang that's going on. The declining population, it is a part of the solution to global warming, but it is also the problem of all the kinds of things, economic growth and all that. So, yeah, and it's hard, it's complicated, it's difficult.
There was a time when we were worried of overpopulation. What happened to that thought?
The Great Recession. But, I went to China. It's funny, I was talking to my friend yesterday. I went to China in 1981, and it was right after the Cultural Revolution. Oh my goodness, I didn't plan to talk this much. It was right after the Cultural Revolution, so all kinds of things were going on, and at that particular moment, it was clear they couldn't feed themselves. So And this was the one child,
Policy.
yeah. And I remember a woman saying, one child, two parents, four grandparents. The child is absolutely spoiled. And at the same time, the things that I saw on the trip had to do with how the control of agriculture was being opened up. But so the whole business about being able to feed ourselves. And so China started back in 1981 on their population control. Well, then, of course, what happened, those of you who pay attention to things like this, is the Chinese culture depends upon the oldest son to take care of the parents when they get old. And if all you have is daughters, you are in not a very good position. And so all of a sudden we have lots of single males, particularly in rural areas with no women to marry. And so how did this all happen? It's kind of like in places it happened this way and that way. And we know that when women learn to read, the number of children decreases. I mean, I don't know that our declining population is bad. It's just we're not organized right now for a declining population. I don't know. I'm a more optimistic. Okay.
That's very interesting. I mean, I don't know about the rest. I hadn't really at all. And I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad Nancy brought that up. I mean,
Yeah. Okay.
but
I intended to just talk about our job isn't done, and that we don't lose heart, because look at the people who show up and say what we do matters.
Well, I'm concerned about the overpopulation of men in China and what they're going to do with them.
well, yeah, that's
I'm
an
not going to
interesting
go there.
point. But I will.
China is its own complication, right? China and
Right.
and they have worked anyway. China is its own complication, yeah. But I think it's and we're all integrated now. I mean, if one thing COVID taught us was that isolation is there is no isolation anymore.
Mhm.
Good thing to worry about. Worry about India with almost as many people as China, right? We have lots to worry about.
I know. Well, thank you, Carol. I
My
think we
pleasure.
all appreciate that, and I loved hearing about what you did with your fellowship. And if I can get the video back, it says that I'm connected, but I don't know. I really wanted to show more of that. So let me go back to my share screen and see where I was. There we go.
While you're doing that, just something that I was observing while conversation was going on. For out of the people that we can actually see their faces, I can pick out 6 of us of whom, let's see, 3 of us had no kids and the other 3 only had 1 child.
Mhm.
So as a group, we did not add much to the
Population problem.
population.
Okay, well, it looks like I've got my video.